So I often tell my own students when we're learning about any old thing, I remind them to think of their 6-year-old selves and consider something that was really exciting to them. I think in maybe K through 5, we tend to teach with a lot of curiosity in mind. But imagine a 8-year-old in an astronomy class, and just like the auspicious ability to think of the sky and the cosmos and all those things. Like why does a student in a gen ed class of astronomy not get to lead with that same enthusiasm? At some point in my mind, and I think in other educators' minds, we beat some of that out by like standardized norms that we value within the school system. And so I think by the time students enter college, many of them are motivated by things that aren't as internal as they need to be. So for example, they are doing something to please somebody else. I say to my students, what is it that you want to learn? They're used to learning again for the test or learning to meet some sort of criteria, because our society places such weight on getting to that next goal, versus being like emblazoned with, I care about this subject. And that does happen, thankfully, for a lot of people along the way. So the research hands down will show that if you ask students, what is your number one strategy for studying? And they will tell you that they read their notes or reread their notes or reread their textbook. And if you think about what that means, you know how it is when you read a textbook or a text of any kind. If you aren't drilling down on the information and paying attention, you're 3/4 of the way through a page and you're like, well, what the hell is this about? So I try to get students to understand all the barriers that they have working against them and how to, create an environment to study. So it's really they think that by doing it means learning, but it doesn't. So what I tell students about before I tell them how to study is I teach them the limits of attention and how we set ourselves up for failure by not understanding how attention and memory works. And so that's why knowing that you can't do more than one thing at a time. People claim to be multitaskers, but there's no such thing. The only time you can do more than one thing is when the task that's primary doesn't suffer because of anything else that you stack on. So, we can drive and we have a lot of automaticity to drive. But if it starts snowing, then that automaticity goes away and we have to use our controlled attention. So I try to get students to understand. A lot of students think that they can study with music. That's another misconception. Well, back to the attention thing, even if it's your favorite music and it's got your favorite lyrics, that's great, but you're going to be using some of your, what we call cognitive capacity to hum along, and you're draining the energy that you needed to focus on what you're reading. So the other piece that I tell students is we talk about the 3 big things for learning, and it's skill. So how much actual practical skill? Like, do you know how to test yourself? Do you know how to be a fairly good reader? So like there's skill that people bring to the table, and it's not necessarily like high intellect, it's just a basic intellect. And that's something, you're carrying like a basket of skills. And then there are skills that involve will or motivation. And then there are skills that involve utilizing your resources. And I tested several different students over a course of a few semesters on this scale that will give you measurements of skill, will, and then using resources. And we as MSU students, they score at the national average for skill, which is great. It means our students are as skilled as any other student, which I always have said. We have really, really great students here. We have students basically on the entire bell curve, right? but overall we're average. So yay. They test average and motivation, right? Which, like, if you talk to any student in week 10, motivation is really tricky at this point, but we're average. But where MSU students tested below the norm was on reaching out and using resources that are there for them. But it leads me to something that I talk about in my work, is that students are underutilizing resources. So if you talk to career services, the writing center, our academic skill building options, people underutilize those services. They don't know they exist in even some cases. And when I tell students, like, you have 10 mental health counseling sessions if you sign up and you get scheduled, and these are like simple things. I'm a cognitive psychologist, which means that I focus in courses on how we think and cognition, which is a general course. Yeah, and I was trained with a master's in college education while I was getting my doctorate. And that's really motivated me to, like, consistently be evaluating my own teaching, and kind of has propelled my love for both my own learning and student learning at the same time.